I see. Well, it's not your fault. This place is crazy. If we stay here, all of us will end up dead. What should we do, Wesker?
The evolution of Albert Wesker's character is one of the most baffling elements of the Resident Evil franchise. He's without a doubt the most iconic villain of the entire series, and he might just be its most well-known character in general. His popularity is interesting because his appearances were always kept pretty brief, until he really took the reins as the main antagonist of Resident Evil 5. He was in plenty of the earlier games, but usually he was running around doing his own thing off-screen, only appearing in a handful of short cutscenes which left the player to wonder what he was up to. I guess it'd be hard not to be remembered if when you did appear you had such a signature look and way of speaking. Throughout his appearances, Wesker became a testament to video game absurdity, sticking out like a sore thumb due to how much his design and mannerisms contrasted the self-serious overarching storyline the series had developed by its fifth main entry. At the same time, he's a reflection of the series' storyline itself, starting out as something so simple but growing more and more out of control after being introduced to layers of retcons meant to explain other retcons. As usual, we're gonna take a look at his story in release order, so you can really feel how things change from one game to the next, and decide for yourself whether you think this was all some grand vision from the beginning or a series of ad hoc decisions. To better illustrate this, I'm gonna be breaking this into 3 different videos, each one involving one of the 3 major twists or retcons that I think completely recontextualize his character. So let's strip away those layers and start from square one so we can see how Wesker got from point A to God.
I'm just getting started.
Everything starts in the original Resident Evil for the PlayStation 1, and as we go along to the sequels, you're gonna see that this was a real humble beginnings for the character. Wesker is the leader of the Alpha team of Raccoon City Police Department's Elite Special Forces unit STARS. After a series of mysterious and gruesome murders in the Arkley Mountains, on the outskirts of Raccoon City, STAR's Bravo team is sent in to investigate. But after contact is lost, Alpha Team heads in to find them and figure out what went wrong. When they locate Bravo Team's downed helicopter, they're attacked by twisted creatures and forced to retreat into a nearby mansion. Right off the bat, Wesker grabs your attention during the game's cheesy live-action opening. You're ready to get into this horror game, and one of the first things you see is this smug dude in sunglasses slick back his hair and cross his arms like he's too good for this. Whether you pick Jill or Chris as your character, this first cutscene in the mansion is virtually the same. Wesker is in both campaigns, though in Chris's story, Jill is there but Barry is missing, and in Jill's story, Barry is there but Chris is missing. Wesker makes sure no one tries to open the front door, which would let their pursuers in, and he immediately instructs the others to begin searching for their missing partners. Of course, things aren't much better than outside, as it's revealed to be full of flesh-eating zombies and other monsters out to kill you. When you return to the main hall in both campaigns, Wesker has disappeared, alongside Jill in Chris's story. With no leads on what could have happened to him, you have no other options but to continue exploring for clues. Wesker doesn't appear again until much later, where he can be seen delivering justice to a swarm of bees. With these sharpshooting abilities, you can clearly see why he would rise through the ranks in STARS. Apparently, he's just been doing his own thing this whole time, losing Jill along the way in Chris's campaign. Instead of tagging along with you, he tells you to finish exploring the now hunter-infested mansion, while he double-checks the area you just completed. As you continue playing, you learn more and more about the origins of this outbreak. The Umbrella Corporation, a big name in pharmaceuticals, had been using this mansion to hide their illegal activities related to the creation of bioorganic weapons. By infecting various hosts with the T-virus they'd synthesized, all of these zombies and monsters were created. Both playable characters will find their teammate Enrico wounded and hiding in the caves beneath the mansion. He tells them that this was all a plot by Umbrella and warns them of a traitor within STARS. But before he can explain further, he's shot and killed by someone off-screen, who takes off running and escapes. Eventually, everyone makes it to the secret Umbrella laboratory that this mansion was hiding, which is where the outbreak spawned from. The identity of the traitor becomes obvious once you find some projector slides, which reveal a photo of an Umbrella bioweapon research and development team, including one member conspicuously wearing sunglasses with slicked back blonde hair. You find Wesker in the heart of the facility, and you get a number of different variants of this scene depending on who you're playing as, and what choices you made throughout the story regarding Barry or Rebecca. On Jill's side of the story, he reveals that Barry's been working for him during this mission, and if you kept Barry alive up until this point, he'll pull a gun out on Jill. He's only going along with this because Wesker's blackmailing him by threatening his family. Wesker admits he's an agent of Umbrella, and that this was the organization's plan to cover up the outbreak, by destroying the facility alongside everyone in STARS. These twists are foreshadowed back in the cabin area, where you can stumble upon Barry having a private conversation with what sounds like Wesker on the other side of a door, though he doesn't agree that STARS needs to be wiped out. Wesker will tell you about the ultimate creation they've made here, birthed from the T-Virus, the Tyrant, which is being kept in the room behind him. Since he was one of the scientists involved in its creation, he's become somewhat obsessed with it, and doesn't plan on flushing all of this research down the drain. He'll dismiss Barry because he wants to show Jill his Tyrant in private, and as he does, we get a better idea of his perspective. He seems to believe power is all that matters, calling the Tyrant beautiful, and telling Jill that the weak deserve to be food. When he drains the liquid from the tank, it comes to life, smashing the glass and slowly walking towards Jill. Wesker thinks it's an obedient little pet, but then it turns to him, and to his surprise, it impales him through the guts, killing him and tossing him aside. Barry won't be there with Jill to meet Wesker for this whole reveal if he died earlier in the story, and the scene changes once again depending on whether you waited for Barry to bring you a rope or not earlier in the game. I think this moment is supposed to show Barry whether you really trust him or not, and if you do, he'll come back after he's been dismissed by Wesker to knock him out and save Jill. The two of them will check out the Tyrant anyway and defeat it. But when they leave, they realize Wesker had woken up and ran to activate the facility's self-destruct system. I used to think this implied Wesker survived this version of the ending, but you can go back through the boiler room to where this system is controlled to find his dead body. He was likely killed by one of the Chimera enemies all over this area, so it's interesting that he ends up dying no matter what ending you get. Wesker gets impaled by the Tyrant in Chris's story as well, but he has two different cutscenes beforehand depending on whether you kept Rebecca alive. If she's with you, Wesker will admit to killing Enrico earlier and then shoots Rebecca too, though it's revealed a bit later that her bulletproof vest saved her. When Chris confronts him alone, Wesker will admit that he's planning on cutting ties with Umbrella and stealing their research on the Tyrant since the company doesn't know how to utilize its potential. He doesn't say what he plans on using that data for, but he still wants to show the Tyrant off to Chris. He expects him to be impressed, but is stunned when Chris starts laughing at the monster and the absurdity of the situation. Wesker tries to change his mind by releasing it, but as previously stated, he gets impaled all the same. If we're just going by this first game, Wesker was an opportunist who tried playing with fire and karma caught up with him. The scientist who plays God and ends up getting killed by his own creation is a classic dynamic, and it fits perfectly with the story of the first Resident Evil. For someone with such lofty ambitions, it's ironic any evidence of his body would be wiped out by the lab's self-destruct sequence. At this point, we know this wasn't the end of the character, but I definitely think he was just intended to be a one-off villain who dies due to his own hubris. I think this is corroborated by the appearance of a zombified Wesker from the extra mode exclusive to the Sega Saturn port called Battle Game. Obviously this isn't meant to be canon or anything, but I believe the decision to have him undead here was inspired by his death in the main story. On top of that, his death was taken as fact in the following two games in the PS1 trilogy, and there aren't any hints of his survival being up in the air. You can actually find his desk in the Raccoon City Police Department, and in RE2 if you check his desk 50 times, you'll find a hidden film reel that you can develop. This reveals a cute photo of Rebecca from a basketball game the department must have had. Guess he had a crush on her before he attempted to kill her with a shot to the chest. This same Easter egg is present in the remake as well, although the process for getting it is slightly different. They recreated the scene from what looks like her model in the RE0 remaster, which doesn't look as charmingly vintage, although I think I prefer the new pose for obvious reasons. When moving the series forward to Code Veronica on the Dreamcast, they must have felt the need to establish a reoccurring villain that players could focus on defeating beyond a single game. Each of the 3 entries on PlayStation 1 had self-contained antagonists that got dealt with by the end. The only overarching threat was Umbrella as a company, and I liked how in those games they were merely a faceless conglomerate focused on profit above morality. Code Veronica is where the series started to shift towards antagonists who were looking to use these viruses and biological research to transcend mortality and become higher forms of beings. This is the game, alongside additional files added to the N64 version of RE2, that establishes the 3 founders of Umbrella, Oswell E. Spencer, Edward Ashford, and James Marcus, who together discovered the progenitor virus, which would lead to the creation of the T-virus. In a way, this makes Code Veronica one of the most important games in the series, especially if we're just looking at the conflict between Chris and Wesker, since 1, Code Veronica, and 5 form a trilogy of sorts. I believe each one of the next 3 games focus on one of these founders, with Code Veronica establishing Ashford, Remake 1 detailing Spencer in a way the original never did, and 0 showing us Marcus. In my opinion, the drama between these founding families and their goals to become gods is where the series' overall storyline started to go downhill. I much prefer the idea that Umbrella just wanted money, over it secretly existing to enable old men with god complexes to transcend humanity and become the next step in human evolution, which is the type of story I feel like I've seen done in countless anime. This idea will eventually apply more directly to Wesker as the series goes along, but for now it applies to the main antagonist of Code Veronica, the daughter of the Ashford who co-founded Umbrella, Alexia Ashford, who injected herself with an offshoot of the T-virus known as T-Veronica. She's been in cryostasis for the last 15 years after she froze herself, discovering that was the key to slowing the virus's mutation within her and allowing her to control its power. Claire Redfield from RE2 had been snooping around one of Umbrella's facilities, so she was captured and taken to a prison island run by what was left of the Ashford family. Not long after she arrived, the island started getting bombed by unknown forces, that we later learn were under the command of Wesker. This attack causes an outbreak on the island, killing almost everyone there, but allowing Claire to escape to a base in Antarctica with another prisoner named Steve. Wesker is handled really sparingly in this game, and doesn't actually appear until the second half at the same time Chris does, both being missing in action since that original game. Chris came looking for his sister Claire, intending to save her from imprisonment, but instead finds she's already left this ruined island. Turns out he's being watched by Wesker, who's been searching the island for a sample of the T-Veronica virus. Even at this point, they conceal Wesker's face, so it's possible you still wouldn't be able to recognize him with the Dreamcast's jump in graphical fidelity over the PlayStation 1 games. Or you might not even consider the idea that Wesker would be brought back, because at this point he was just a one-off villain who died several games ago. When he sees Chris, he decides to send him a little treat, unleashing a new form of hunter which only targets what these little surveillance robots tell them to. This becomes your main threat throughout the facility, because as soon as you get spotted, a hunter flies in from off-screen to mess you up. Eventually, he confronts Chris in person, revealing his face and the fact that he didn't die for the first time to Chris's surprise. Before Chris can pull out his gun, Wesker darts across the room and knocks him into a wall in an instant, leaving an afterimage to convey his speed. This is the first time he's portrayed to have supernatural abilities of any kind, which would have been extremely shocking for players of the time who couldn't have known where his character would go from here. He lifts Chris off the ground with one hand, and when he gets his sunglasses punched off, he smugly turns back to reveal he now has red snake eyes. It's not really explained in this game what this means, but he's clearly been enhanced by some sort of virus. He reaffirms how much he hates Chris for foiling his plans in the first game, and explains that he's now working for a new organization. It's not clear if joining them was always part of his plan before he was impaled, but we see the back of his outfit says HCF. This stands for Hive or Host Capture Force, which is like this group's private military company, similar to the ones working for Umbrella we saw in RE3. He plans on heading after Alexia in Antarctica, who's just been released from her 15-year slumber by her twin brother. He throws Chris into a storage pod and leaves him to fend for himself, as one of these stretchy enemies you fought throughout the game gets released. We don't see him again until right before the climax when he confronts Alexia directly. This scene takes place in a replica version of the mansion from the first game, built within this secret base in Antarctica, all to give the return of this conflict between Chris and Wesker a greater sense of poignancy, but to me it just seems excessively symbolic. With the T Veronica virus under her control, Alexia can summon these giant plant-like tentacles to cause chaos. She laughs maniacally, then reveals her true form by burning away her exterior, as she walks down the stairs towards Wesker, who commands her to come with him. You'd think he'd use some sort of equipment to capture her, since he apparently commands a task force specializing in this very thing. But no, he just gives her a stern talking to, and then gets bitch slapped down the stairs so hard he does a 360-degree rotation. He struggles to get up, and she jumps down and slaps him again, bouncing him off the wall. He's getting completely dominated, but at the last second, she's distracted by noticing Chris watching from behind cover, giving Wesker the chance to run away in fear, narrowly escaping her flaming blood that she uses to seal the exit. Man, this game was such a shift for the series in terms of tone and subject matter. The closest we got to something like this was with Birkin in RE2, but he was shot and dying and used the G-Virus as a last-ditch effort to survive, instead becoming an uncontrollable monster who continued to mutate painfully until he was put out of his misery. He didn't want that fate, and he definitely wasn't turned into a godlike being like the theatrical Alexia here, with her extravagant fire blood. Within the context of the original Code Veronica, that's legitimately the last time we see Wesker. So I guess we're really supposed to assume he ran home with his tail between his legs, leaving it up to the two Redfields to finish off Alexia and destroy the base. But if you're scratching your head because this isn't how you remembered the game going down, that's probably because you're thinking of Code Veronica X, which was an enhanced version of the game made a year later, which launched concurrently with a PlayStation 2 port, then came out for the GameCube another 2 years later. Among other things, this port adds several new scenes with Wesker, and even makes key changes to a previous one. Now, the first time we see Wesker is much earlier, during Claire's portion, when he suddenly reveals himself to thank her for drawing Chris to the island. He acts very cordial, but then grabs her by the face and smacks her across the courtyard, declaring his hatred for her brother. He starts stepping on her shoulder, but then gets a call from his unit pulling away his attention. He kicks her in the face one last time for good measure and then leaves her, hinting at his new enhancements when he turns back one last time with his eyes leaving behind red streaks, and then takes a superhuman leap over a wall. This probably does a better job introducing the character and setting him up as a pervasive threat than how he was handled in the original. Things play out as normal for a majority of the game, so now it's a little weird that they conceal his face during the cutscene that used to be his first appearance. So let's jump forward to the encounter between Wesker and Alexia. It's like Wesker himself complained about the way he was treated in this scene originally, because they completely changed it to favor him instead. Now, rather than being pimp-slapped, he either skillfully dodges her strike with a backflip or manages to recover from it in a more dignified way. He rolls out of the way of her second attack, and as she tries to burn him, he kicks off multiple walls, and in slow motion punches her in the face while his fist is on fire. When he dodges another one of her flame attacks, it exposes Chris's presence. He goes to attack him, but Alexia separates them with a wall of fire. Wesker decides that he'll let Chris deal with her, since, as he so condescendingly puts it, he was one of his best men under him in Stars. It's kind of funny, this feels like the version of events Wesker tells his friends to make himself seem cool and protect his ego. It really does convey the polar opposite idea of the original, when before he was in awe of her, saying, "What power?" And now he's scoffing at her, only getting his clothes burned, but never taking any damage himself. To me, it isn't Code Veronica, but this scene in X specifically that changes Wesker into the character we know him as today. It was strange bringing him back and giving him powers in the first place, but at least his power level was kept in check. He was a danger to the human characters, but didn't take away from the threat of the main antagonist. Now he's jumping around in crazy action scenes in slow motion, showing that he's a bigger threat than the villain you're supposed to be taking so seriously and the whole story was revolving around. If you're trying to set up an overarching rival for Chris, it makes sense that you wouldn't want him getting smacked around in his first reappearance. But it could have been done without him depreciating Alexia, because now we just want to squash her like a bug so we can move on to the more personal adversary. And that's what happens, because now, after Alexia's been defeated, we spot Wesker making his escape with Claire as his hostage. Chris chases him to a port where he has a submarine parked, and he explains he's taken Steve's body, who died after he was infected with the T Veronica virus a bit earlier in the game. This'll allow him to extract a sample of the virus, making his mission a success. It's amusing that he hints at the idea that Steve might come back from the dead like he did, when that never ended up happening, since Steve wasn't exactly a popular character no matter the haircut they tried to give him. Wesker lets Claire go, since he's only interested in getting revenge on Chris. The feeling is mutual, since Chris still wants payback for all of the STARS members he betrayed and got killed. We finally get a straight-up fight between the two, something players wouldn't get to see again for almost a decade. Chris tries to hit him with a pipe but is easily blocked and countered. Almost like this is a wrestling match, Wesker punches Chris in the face repeatedly without any resistance, and even starts gesturing to an imaginary crowd to hype them up. It makes sense that Wesker would want to take his time and enjoy killing Chris, but these moves pale in comparison to some of the other feats he was performing throughout the game. It all ends when Chris drops a bunch of metal beams on him, which he's suddenly too slow to react to. He still emerges unharmed, but then an explosion suddenly breaks them up, severely burning Wesker's face. He kinda arbitrarily decides the fight's over, choosing to let Chris go while he laughs to himself in the middle of the exploding dock. With this scene, you can definitely see the series transforming more towards one that values action, spectacle, and choreography. Which is interesting because that kind of stuff was never really the appeal of the PS1 trilogy. This is in part because of the graphical leap that allowed them to do scenes like this when they previously couldn't. But I wonder how much the team developing Resident Evil at this point was influenced or felt like it was competing with Metal Gear Solid in the field of narrative-driven tactical action. There's a lot of parallels between these franchises moving forward, and I'll just get this comparison out of the way now. I see Wesker as having an extremely similar trajectory to Revolver Ocelot, since both of them began as secondary antagonists who evolved into the main antagonist of the most significant entry after a decade of retcons added more and more to their backstory until they became a completely different character. We'll explore that idea more as we move into 4 and 5. But Code Veronica was where that seed started to be planted, with the way they undid his death and had him return with extraordinary strength and agility. Before we move on, it's worth mentioning both versions of Code Veronica also have their own version of Battle Game, and instead of being a zombie, Wesker is a playable character that you can unlock after beating this mode as Chris. The other characters run around with things like infinite ammo magnums that can one-hit kill enemies, but Wesker is the complete opposite, only receiving a knife and some health items. This means you've got to be really precise with how you fight the hordes of enemies here, stabbing them in the shins to avoid being bitten. I guess they really wanted you to earn the right to experience Wesker, but it's interesting that he never showcases any of his powers. I didn't attempt this mode until I replayed Code Veronica X, and I actually successfully made it through. At one point you can get a magnum with 6 shots, and if you save them for the final encounter, you can make short work of them. All of the characters face a different boss at the end of the course, and since Wesker normally only has a knife, they have him face off against Alexia's earlier transformation. They even play the whole cutscene again from when he encountered her in the story. So it's kinda like this is the ideal version of events, where Wesker takes her on in a one-on-one fight and wins. Once you beat her, you get this hilarious image of Wesker looking back with a smile, like he successfully completed his mission, got the sample of the virus, and went home. Moving forward, you'd think that when remaking the first game in 2002 for the GameCube, they'd want to try to foreshadow or build up to Wesker's transformation. But nope, at this point the events of 1 had nothing to do with why he got powers in Code Veronica. And instead, Resident Evil Remake remains true to the events of the original, while expanding on the backstory and hazards of its setting. We first see Wesker in the opening CGI cutscene, which is more in line with the aesthetics of the game compared to the live-action stuff from the original. He saves Chris and Jill from being attacked by infected dogs, since he needs to make sure they actually make it to the mansion for testing. He disappears from the main hall just like before, and in the same way, Jill can still overhear Barry talking to him from the other side of a door. This time it's kept more ambiguous as to who Barry's talking to, since Wesker never speaks. But with the context we've already discussed, it's gotta be Wesker, since Barry's still protesting against the idea that STARS needs to be destroyed, and having second thoughts about going along with things. Both characters find Wesker in the same cabin area, and he must have been able to tell Barry might try to hinder his plans, because he starts sowing doubt in Jill's mind about it, making her think Barry might be the one conspiring against them. He goes on to kill Enrico from the shadows just like before, but the main difference comes in the Chris campaign when the two of you team up to fight an unkillable enemy named Lisa Trevor. She was the daughter of the architect who built this mansion for Spencer, the now singular head of Umbrella, who kidnapped the family and experimented on them to advance the company's viral research. Lisa is one example of how demented Umbrella was with their tactics, mutating this young girl into a monster and tormenting her parents to death. It is pretty cool seeing Wesker actually fighting alongside Chris, but we know he's complacent in this whole situation as someone who worked at this very facility. Since she's immune to all damage, all you can do is run from her and try to knock her over the edge to buy yourself some time. If you knock these stones over, they'll pull the chains they're attached to and open the door as well as the coffin in the middle of the room. This contains the skeleton of Lisa's mother, who died long before her. And once she sees it, she takes her skull and jumps down the pit, leaving you to catch your breath. Wesker says he'll secure the area while Chris advances to Umbrella's underground lab, where the characters of both campaigns will later find him operating a terminal in the room with the Tyrant. Your encounter with him will change depending on whether or not you were able to keep your supporting character alive throughout the story. If Jill goes in solo, he pulls his gun out on her and announces his plan to separate from Umbrella and burn all of this down. But again, as he marvels at what he calls the ultimate life form, it impales him through the torso and throws his bleeding body off to the side. If Barry's there with her, he'll betray her, but then come back at the last moment to save her from being executed by Wesker. They think he's taken out, but he jumps back up to activate the Tyrant, who stops to pimp slap him, which at least seems like a less violent death. In Chris's first version of the encounter, Wesker surprises him with some sick martial arts, but gets stabbed all the same. If Rebecca's there, he shoots her so he can show Chris his Tyrant in peace. But after he's gored again, we learn she survived thanks to her bulletproof vest. Just like in the original game, if we take this story as an isolated thing, we can assume Wesker dies here either from being skewered or in the subsequent self-destruct sequence. But of course, we know that isn't true if we take what we know from Code Veronica. The next major release in the series was Resident Evil 0, which was a prequel made in conjunction with the first remake and released later that same year for GameCube. It details what happened with STAR's Bravo team immediately prior to the events of the first game, starting with Rebecca on an Umbrella-owned train full of zombies. Periodically, we cut to Wesker overseeing the situation alongside Birkin from RE2, as the two of them try to figure out what caused the T-virus outbreak in the Arklay Mountains. Turns out it was caused by a swarm of leeches carrying the virus, which kill the Umbrella troops Wesker sent in to cover up any evidence of the company's involvement. These leeches are part of a hive mind entity called the Queen Leech, which took on the memories and appearance of a young James Marcus after fusing with his corpse. Marcus was one of those 3 original founders of Umbrella, who invented the T-virus by conducting research on leeches, but was eventually betrayed by Spencer, who wanted his research for himself. He sent a kill squad to eliminate him, with 2 young scientists, Birkin and Wesker, showing up to mock him as he took his dying breaths. That's when a leech entered his body and took his form, regenerating over the course of a decade. Thinking it was Marcus, the Queen Leech set out for revenge, causing the T-virus outbreak in the Umbrella lab and train, which would lead to RE1's events. This is an extremely dumb story, and I feel like the design of the Queen Leech, which tends to take the form of a young Marcus, feels totally out of place within the series' aesthetics, and would fit more in something like Final Fantasy X. But he definitely moves more in the direction of megalomaniacal villains, which started with Alexia in Code Veronica, with how he's overjoyed while claiming he'll cause the entire world to burn. Since Marcus ran this Umbrella training facility, he oversaw Wesker and Birkin during their early days. He wanted them to compete and strive to one-up each other, and they both became his apprentices of sorts. This is the first time I can think of where these two characters are presented as rivals of any kind, with Wesker working on the T-virus T-Virus and Birkin pioneering G. But I guess that makes sense with how the games were actually made. Wesker was dead in the context of the second game when they first came up with the idea of Birkin and his new virus. I still struggle with reconciling Wesker's design with the idea that he was pioneering viral research in a lab coat before the events of the first game. Either way, I guess both of these guys betraying Marcus could be seen as their first real villainous acts. With the Queen Leech releasing the T-Virus, Wesker figures Umbrella is finished and decides this is the moment he's gonna abandon the company. But Birkin decides to stay since he wants to finish the G-Virus, leading into RE2. Wesker says it's his plan to sacrifice the STARS team so they can collect combat data, but he does say killing them was Umbrella's intention in the remake. I guess he could have been lying there, but that would seem odd since he's revealing all of this right before he expects them to die. We're gonna end it here, but this is just the first piece of the saga that makes up Wesker's involvement in the series. Chronologically, after Code Veronica, we enter an era where he's operating behind the scenes, working towards an ultimate goal that isn't really defined until the 5th main entry. We'll explore that middle period in the next video, where the retcons really started getting layered onto him, transforming what was once a simple villain looking to profit from a bad situation, to a superpowered egomaniac with delusions of grandeur looking to transform the world.